In 1974, 7 notorious outlaws ambushed a convoy carrying bootleg liquor and gold in the Appalachian Mountains. None of them were ever seen again. Official reports claimed the gang fled into the deep woods, leaving rumors and eerie legends to spread across the mountains. The town of Mill Hollow gradually fell silent as the coal mine closed. Residents left, and memories of the robbery faded into yellowed newspaper pages. But nearly a decade later, when County Inspector John Whitfield revisited old case files, he uncovered something that didn't align with what people had believed. A rusted Colt 38, recently pulled from a creek, matched the serial number of a weapon belonging to Roy Granger, the gang's leader, unraveling a brutal mystery buried for nearly 3 decades. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. In the fall of 1974, a convoy carrying bootleg liquor and gold vanished in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, along with the 7 outlaws who once terrorized the region. The press at the time described them as fugitives who evaporated into the deep forest, with police launching dozens of searches but finding no bodies, weapons, or any trace. The story was quickly buried in yellowed newspapers, but in Mill Hollow, memories of that night never faded. People still spoke of flickering green flames in the abandoned mine's entrance, swearing they heard screams mixed with gunshots echoing from the mountain's depths. On stormy nights, locals claimed to see shadowy figures moving through the woods, like the souls of those who perished returning to seek justice. The legend of the mine ghosts became a haunting obsession, a cautionary tale whispered across generations that some secrets in the Appalachians should never be uncovered. Nearly a decade later, in the summer of 1983, County Inspector John Whitfield was unexpectedly assigned a dusty old case file. Inside were not only sparse reports and blurry photos of the 7 wanted faces, but also a new piece of evidence retrieved by villagers from a shallow creek running through Mill Hollow. A rusted Colt .38, caked in mud and moss, yet still heavy in John's hands, as if carrying the shadow of the past. He wiped the rust with a cloth, and under the dim yellow light of the archive room, the serial number emerged clearly. John froze, his blood running cold as he cross-checked the sealed records. The number matched perfectly with the gun registered to Roy Granger, the leader of the 1974 gang, believed to have vanished forever in the Appalachian mist. That rusted Colt .38 wasn't just a piece of metal swallowed by time. It was the first evidence suggesting the legend might not be mere rumor, that the outlaws of yesteryear never left Appalachia. They were still there, in the heart of the mountains, or at least their bones and crimes lay buried under cold layers of earth and stone, waiting for the truth to be unearthed from the darkness. The thought haunted John like a shadow as he gripped the steering wheel, leaving the Carter County headquarters. John Whitfield drove his old Plymouth along the winding trail into Mill Hollow, a town once sustained by the coal mine, now reduced to a few sagging houses and desolate streets. The general store was dust-covered, the bar's sign broken, and rotting window frames creaked in the mountain wind. It was like a forgotten photograph, devoid of the vibrant community it once held. The coal mine had closed in the late 70s, residents left in droves for new livelihoods, leaving only wandering spirits in the mine ghost tales. John parked in front of a weathered wooden house with a tin roof, where he'd heard one stubborn resident still remain. The door creaked open, revealing a frail, hunched old man leaning on a cane, his cloudy eyes aged but piercingly sharp. He introduced himself as Elias Boone, a former miner who'd lived his entire life in Mill Hollow. John showed him a blurry photo of the 1974 gang. The old man stared for a long time before letting out a dry laugh. "You say 7? No. That night, there were 8. I saw them go into Black Hollow mine with my own eyes. But later, when the papers came out, only 7 names were listed. One was erased, like he never existed." His raspy words sent a chill down John's spine. He took careful notes and asked for the 8th man's name, but the old man shook his head. His name vanished from every record. "I remember, but I don't dare say it. Those who mention that name don't live long." With that, he pulled a tattered curtain shut, slammed the door, and left John standing on a porch covered in dry leaves. In John's mind, a new piece of the puzzle flickered. If the old man was right, the entire official record had been manipulated from the start. Back at Carter County's old archive room, John painstakingly sifted through files. The dark, musty room reeked of mold and decaying paper, making it hard to breathe. Thousands of reports were stacked chaotically. As if someone had deliberately buried them. After hours, he found a thin, typewritten report titled Convoy Robbery, 1974. Below the list of the 7 familiar outlaws, John noticed a line crossed out in smeared red ink. The mark was heavy, jagged, like a wound torn from the page. Next to it, scribbled handwriting read, "Not for public release." John's heart pounded as he touched it. This was the first proof Elias was telling the truth. Questions surged. Who was the 8th man? Why was his name erased? And who had the power to do it? John looked for the reporting officer's signature and saw, "Reported by Harold McCready." He recognized the name, a former officer in charge of the area, but personnel records showed Harold died in a car accident 2 weeks after filing the report. His vehicle plunged off a cliff at night, with no witnesses, and the case was ruled a loss of control. A red flag flared in John's mind: accident or silencing. He sat silently in the archive room, surrounded only by the heavy ticking of a clock. The dim light through the dusty window illuminated the original report, evidence that the 1974 disappearance was far from simple. John slipped the paper into his case file, locked the drawer, but a dangerous premonition stirred within him. If Harold McCready died after revealing the truth, reopening this case was like walking the same doomed path. And this time, whoever was behind it wouldn't let him escape easily. Outside the headquarters, as John stepped out, a cold mountain wind stung his face. He noticed all his car's tires were flat. Someone knew he was digging into the Mill Hollow case. John Whitfield drove his Plymouth back to Mill Hollow the next morning, with mountain fog still blanketing the path and the sun barely piercing through bare trees. After the archive discovery, a name erased in Harold McCready's suspicious death, he knew he had to go deeper, not just into the files, but into the heart of the mountains. Black Hollow, the name Elias mentioned with a haunted look, became a place he had to investigate. The county police had long marked it unsafe, but John understood, if the truth was hidden, it lay there. The trail to the mine was rocky, with rusted rail tracks snaking like dead vines. The mine's entrance gaped like the mouth of a giant beast, pitch black, exhaling a crypt-like chill. John flicked on his flashlight, stepping cautiously down the slope, his boots echoing in the earth. The smell of mold and rusted iron made him grimace, but his heart raced with anticipation of what lay ahead. About 15 meters in, his flashlight beam caught something that stopped him cold. 2 human skeletons, stacked atop each other, spines twisted, arms bound with rotted rope, still tight around them. Both skulls had a clean hole in the back, the bone edges cracked. A textbook sign of an execution shot. John knelt, gloved hand brushing the cold bone, feeling as if he'd touched the secret he'd been chasing. In the decayed pocket of one skeleton, John pulled out a tattered paper and a moss-covered, crumpled coin. Wiping away dirt, he saw it was a 1972 $5 bill, a type never widely circulated, part of the convoy's stolen haul. His pulse surged. Direct evidence that at least 2 gang members didn't escape. They died here, in the mountain's heart, and the stolen money became their burial relic. John stood, sweeping his light across the tunnel wall. In the trembling beam, a symbol emerged, faded but distinct. 3 diagonal slashes and 2 horizontal lines, forming the Roman numeral 13, drawn in dark brown, likely blood. He shuddered. This wasn't drunken graffiti, but a deliberate mark, painted in human blood. The number 13 in Appalachia was always an ill omen, and here, it felt like a curse etched by those who perished. John immediately called the Carter County forensics team. As they examined, They confirmed both died the same day, identical bullet wounds, close range, precise execution. Not a mine collapse. Preliminary reports noted signs of struggle, broken ribs before death, suggesting they were beaten before being shot. As technicians collected evidence, John scanned the dark tunnel. Everything was silent, except for water dripping from the ceiling onto the muddy floor. He imagined 1974, 7, or 8. Men entering this place, clutching gold, eyes gleaming with greed. Then, in the darkness, a gun raised from behind, shots ringing out, cold and merciless. The screams locals claimed to hear, perhaps this very moment. As the skeletons were bagged in nylon, John stared at the blood-drawn 13. His mind swirled with theories. What did 13 mean? Were there more victims killed and hidden here beyond the 7? Or was it the betrayer's signature, a sick message for anyone daring to enter? John Whitfield left Black Hollow Mine heavy-hearted. The executed skeletons, the 1972 $5 bill, and the blood-drawn 13 haunted him. But above all, one question gnawed: who pulled the trigger? And why did official records list only 7 when Elias swore there were 8? The deeper he went, the more it felt less like a failed robbery and more like a meticulously covered-up execution. To understand more, John decided to track down the families of the missing, those who'd lived with unresolved pain for nearly a decade. He arrived at a small wooden house at the valley's end, home to the elderly mother of Mark Boone, one of the 7 outlaws. The house was crumbling, weeds choked the yard, the fence collapsed, but an old rocking chair sat on the porch. Mrs. Boone sat there, frail, white-haired, eyes sunken, a living statue weathered by time's storms. John greeted her, introduced himself, and explained he was investigating the 1974 disappearance. At first, she didn't respond, staring into the misty mountains. Then her hoarse voice broke. "What do you want to know? My Mark's been dead a long time. But how he died, no one dares say." She stood shakily, went inside, and returned with a yellowed envelope. "This is the last letter he sent me, days before he vanished." John opened it. The handwriting was scrawled, rushed, but the final line chilled him. "If I don't come back, look in Black Hollow." His heart clenched. Mark had foreseen his death, or at least a brutal confrontation. Looking up at Mrs. Boone, he saw despair and rage in her eyes. "Mark told me a secret," she whispered. "In his gang there was one they called the Crow. No one knew his real name, but they believed he'd never die. Even if shot, his soul would linger in the mountains, waiting to return." John was stunned. The name the Crow never appeared in any official records he'd read. Among the 7 missing, none bore that alias. Even the report with the crossed-out name didn't mention the Crow. Yet, if Mrs. Boone was right, the 8th man could be him, a figure erased from all records, but alive in the memories of those involved. John recalled the blood-drawn 13 in the mine. Was it tied to the Crow? Was it his mark, a twisted signature claiming existence, or a warning for anyone entering his lair? He pressed for more, but Mrs. Boone shook her head, tears welling. "That's all I know. After that night, none of the gang returned, but I swear that name, the Crow, is this region's curse." John sat in silence, the oppressive air of the small house enveloping him. He knew he'd grasped a crucial piece, but it opened a new abyss, a figure absent from records, a name never documented, yet lingering in witnesses' memories. It could only mean someone deliberately erased him from history, or he survived, hiding under another name. As John left, Mrs. Boone called after him. "Inspector, don't trust everything in those papers. Some truths only echo in the mountains, and the Crow, he never vanished." Leaving the valley, John drove, lost in thought. Mark's letter was direct evidence that he and his gang knew their final destination was Black Hollow, where John found the executed skeletons. The mention of the Crow strengthened his belief that this wasn't just about 7 missing men. Who was the Crow? Was he truly immortal, as rumored, or the betrayer who killed his comrades and erased his identity? John barely slept after leaving Mrs. Boone's. Whispers of the Crow, Mark's final letter, and the smudged Crow lives in the old case file looped in his mind. One question drove him. If the gang was slaughtered in the mountains, why did someone or some force erase the eighth man's name? And why did the Crow linger in witnesses' memories but vanish from official records? The next morning, John drove to Carter County Bank. He requested to review transaction records tied to the names from the 1974 disappearance. The clerk hesitated, but John's inspector badge granted access to old data. The 1970s files, thick with dust, made him cough. He scanned the accounts. Sure enough, several with tens of thousands of dollars were abruptly closed in 1975, a year after the disappearance. Notably, all funds were withdrawn within a week, vanishing without a trace. John's experience told him this wasn't random. Someone likely consolidated the gang's money and covered their tracks. Digging deeper, John paused at one name, Henry Collins. His account, opened in 1975, just after the others closed, wasn't dormant. Steady, small transactions continued from the mid-70s to the early 80s. Utility bills, land purchases, and costs for a small transport company, all under Henry Collins. John noted Henry's registered address, a town 60 miles south of Mill Hollow. Strikingly, Henry's residency records only began in 1980, with no prior data. It was as if he appeared from nowhere, with an entirely blank past. Back at his office, John pulled the old wanted files. He enlarged a photo of Roy Granger, the 1974 gang leader, presumed vanished. The black and white image showed high cheekbones, deep eyes, a wrinkled forehead. Comparing it to Henry Collins' ID photo from the bank records, John felt a chill. The same eyes, same forehead, only aged with a few more lines. There was no doubt Henry Collins was Roy Granger, the man thought lost in the Black Hollow incident. He'd changed his name, shed his past, built a new identity, and lived comfortably for nearly 2 decades. What did it mean? Roy had betrayed his gang, killed them to claim the loot, and staged a mass disappearance to hide his survival. John sank into his chair, mind reeling. For years, Appalachia told tales of 7 robbers swallowed by mine ghosts. But the truth was harsher. A traitor turned legend into a shield, living quietly as an ordinary citizen. Yet, just when John thought he was closing in on the core of the truth, he uncovered something even more chilling. Bank records showed that Roy, a.k.a. Henry Collins, had died in 1990. The death certificate bore the local hospital's seal, and an obituary in the paper confirmed Henry's passing from a stroke at age 57. But in the account statements, John saw clearly, withdrawals continued after the date of death. Even regular payments for a suburban house and a small logging business were maintained consistently. A dead man couldn't write checks or authorize transfers. So who was using Henry Collins' account? Had Roy faked his death to slip into another layer of disguise? Or was a trusted accomplice inheriting his identity? John felt cold sweat on his neck. If Roy was truly dead, it meant the mystery of the Crow remained unsolved, and perhaps the one bearing that alias was exploiting Roy's staged death to run the remnants of the network. But if Roy had faked his death, he'd successfully hidden his identity twice, and was still out there, watching John's every move. As dusk fell, John sat alone in his office. Bank records spread before him. Outside, the mountain wind howled through the door's cracks, like a long wail from the other side. On the desk, Roy Granger's black and white photo stared at him, cold and taunting. John knew he'd stepped onto a new rung of the case, not just skeletons left in a mine, but a man who'd escaped death, reborn under a new name. Only to vanish again in a murky demise. The office phone rang. When John picked up, a low, unfamiliar voice dripped with mockery. "You're on the right track, Inspector. But remember, not all the dead stay in their graves." Then the line went dead, leaving John in thick darkness, his heart pounding like a war drum. The phone call from the previous night haunted John all morning. He drove from Carter County's office through dense fog, the winding mountain road leading south to the abandoned Deep Valley mine, deserted since the late 60s. The bank records and the mysterious voice on the phone convinced him someone was trying to unearth or bury the bloody history of the Appalachian gang. And Deep Valley, marked in old reports, might hold the next piece of the puzzle. The Deep Valley mine sat nestled in a valley, flanked by grim ancient maple forests. The rusted iron gate was sealed, but so decayed that John's firm push sent it tilting with a piercing creak. He flicked on his flashlight, stepping into the cold tunnel, where damp air carried the thick scent of rotting stone and rusted metal. Old boot prints marked the hard ground, unclear if from past miners or a recent visitor. Half a mile in, his flashlight swept a corner, revealing an odd object amid collapsed timbers, a rotted wooden chest, its iron straps broken, the body mottled with mold. John crouched, prying the lid with a crowbar. A sour stench hit him, mixed with the faint smell of rusted gun oil. Inside, beneath a tattered burlap cloth, were two sawed-off shotguns, close-range weapons common in liquor and contraband heists. The barrels were rusted, stocks cracked, but John recognized them as tools of 1970s carnage. At the chest's bottom, he pulled out a hand-drawn map, marked with red crosses at various points. All abandoned mines around the Appalachians. John spread the map on the stone floor, heart racing. Each cross could mark a mass grave where outlaws were eliminated. The more he looked, the surer he was this wasn't a prank. The locations matched where locals reported seeing green flames and hearing screams. In the chest's corner, a thrice-folded paper, smudged but legible, bore scrawled words, "Blood for gold. Roy lives." John froze. Roy lives. Someone had confirmed what the bank records hinted at. If Roy wrote this, it meant he not only betrayed his gang, but returned to this place to etch a brutal message. He traded their lives for gold. John collected the shotguns, map and note into an evidence bag. As he prepared to leave, a chill gripped him. He wasn't alone. He switched off his flashlight, crouching, listening. From a distance, stones crunched, followed by heavy breathing. Another flashlight briefly flickered in a narrow passage behind. John darted through a side tunnel to the mine's entrance. Stepping outside, he looked up and saw a tall, gaunt figure on the hillside, cloaked in dark clothing, motionless as a specter. Weak sunlight glinted off something metallic in their hand, binoculars, or perhaps a gun barrel. John flinched, stepping back, heart pounding. As he raised his pistol, the figure vanished into the forest, swift as if it never existed. He stood still, valley wind whistling through, leaves rustling, the sense of being watched clinging to him. Deep Valley hadn't just given new clues, it revealed a darker truth. His enemy was still out there, tracking every move, waiting to strike. John drove from Deep Valley heavy-hearted, the map of abandoned mines and the scrawled "Blood for gold. Roy lives" haunted him. The shadowy figure watching from the hillside felt like a warning that his investigation wasn't just facing past crimes, but a living force guarding them. He knew he needed clues from the families of the 1974 missing. They might hold evidence or memories official records never revealed. His first stop was the Boone family, not the elderly mother he'd met, but Ethan Boone, Mark Boone's grandson, living on a small farm outside Carter County. Ethan, in his 30s, bore a weathered face from a hard life, his eyes steely, as if carrying a bloody legacy. When John introduced himself, Ethan wasn't surprised. He invited John in, poured black coffee, and pulled a weathered wooden box from under the bed. "You want the truth about Mark Boone?" Ethan asked, voice rough. "Then you need to see this." The box opened, revealing a sawed-off shotgun on faded cloth. John shuddered. Though rusted, the gun retained the heavy menace of a weapon that once terrorized Appalachian roads. What caught John's eye was the stock, carved with M.B., Mark Boone's initials. Ethan lifted the gun, placing it on the table. The barrel was slightly bent, as if it had struck something hard. John leaned close, noting a long dent along the barrel, proof the gun was used not just to shoot but to fight, like a desperate club in close combat. "I found it in my grandfather's old shed," Ethan whispered. "No one in the family dared keep it, but I didn't want it buried. Mark held this gun the last time anyone saw him. John's hand trembled as he touched the carved stock. A tangible link from legend to reality, pulling him closer to that fateful 1974 night. Ethan poured more coffee, eyes darkening. You know, for years, villagers whispered, they didn't vanish because of police or the forest swallowing them. People believe the gang turned on each other. John looked up, heart skipping. What do you mean? There was talk of a snitch for the feds, Ethan said slowly. No one knew who, but the rumor lingers, one of the 7 or 8, if the old man you met spoke true, betrayed them. In their world, betrayal meant death. John leaned back, the room feeling claustrophobic. He'd focused on Roy Granger's betrayal, but now the possibility of a snitch within the gang twisted the picture. If true, that 1974 night wasn't just a gold-driven slaughter, but a cold-blooded trial among outlaws. Ethan slid the shotgun toward John. I don't want it anymore. You need it more. Maybe it'll tell the story my family never heard. John carefully bagged the gun. In his mind, pieces collided. The chest's map. Roy lives. The old man's 8th man claim, and now the MB. Carved shotgun, and snitch rumors. A new spiral emerged. Who was the traitor? Who was punished? Was Roy the sole survivor, built on his comrade's blood? As John stood to leave, Ethan's gaze followed, as if warning. Dig deeper, but beware, your enemy lives in the shadows. He stepped outside, Appalachian wind howling with a mournful wail from distant woods. John knew the truth was never just black and white. Here, in these dark mountains, truth was always stained with blood. John left the Boone farm as the sun sank low, faint light streaking the Appalachians like smeared blood. The MB carved shotgun sat heavy on the passenger seat, a silent witness. Ethan's words about a snitch echoed. One of them was working for the feds. The phrase cut like a blade, forcing John to open a new line of inquiry, not just finding the survivor, but unraveling a web of suspicion where blood and betrayal painted a horrific scene. His next stop was a small house on Franklin's south edge of Franklin, home to Margaret Sloan, ex-wife of Clyde Sloan, one of the 1974 outlaws listed as missing. Margaret, now in her 60s, had short white hair and weary but sharp eyes when she saw John's inspector badge. Clyde's been dead a long time, she said at the door. But I knew someone would come asking about that night eventually. In a living room thick with cigarette smoke and old wood, John sat across from Margaret. She set down a cold tea, her trembling fingers clutching a lit cigarette. That night, she began, Clyde came home late. He sat on the steps, smoking non-stop like a cornered animal. I asked what happened. He just said, none of us will walk out whole, just bury each other under the mountain. John held his breath. The words weren't just despair, they were a dark prophecy, signaling that 1974 night was a fatal trap with no survivors. Margaret stubbed out her cigarette and stood, returning with a dark wooden box, its lock rusted. I kept this for decades, she whispered. It was Clyde's, a notebook. John opened it, finding a small leather-bound book, pages yellowed and frayed. The contents chilled him, symbols, codes, and scrawled notes about locations. Hollow #2, Riverbank, Hollow #3, Burnt Oak, Hollow #4, Under Big Rock. It seemed a catalog of treasure or loot hideouts from their heists. John flipped through, heart racing. This could be the key to the Appalachian treasure map that led 7 men into the forest, never to return. Near the end, a torn-out page stopped him cold. Jagged edges showed someone had deliberately removed information. Margaret frowned as he paused. I know what that page said, she said slowly. I glimpsed it before it was torn out. It read Hollow #5. Roy holds the key. John froze. Roy Granger, the man he'd identified as living under Henry Collins, leaving traces after dying in 1990. If Roy held the key to Hollow #5, he wasn't just a traitor. He controlled access to the biggest treasure. Margaret sighed. I've hidden this secret half my life. Clyde told me if he didn't come back, to forget it all. But I couldn't. I want to know if those screams in the forest that night, were they caused by their own hands? John closed the notebook, meeting her gaze. "Would you testify if this goes to trial?" She gave a dry laugh. "Who cares about an old widow's testimony now? But if needed, I'll speak. I've nothing left to lose." John left as darkness fell. The Appalachian wind howled through the ridges, carrying the scent of damp earth and frantic insects. The notebook in his pocket felt like a stone. Its marked locations were a map to the truth, and the torn page, hollow #5, Roy holds the key, was clear evidence that the betrayal wasn't just for gold, but for absolute control in the shadows. On the drive back, John glanced in the rearview mirror and saw strange headlights tailing him for miles. When he swerved onto a dirt road toward another county, the car followed. Its headlights blazed, engine growling. John gripped the wheel, heart pounding. Clearly, the shadow from Deep Valley never left, and now it was closing in, as if to push him off a cliff with the secrets he hadn't yet exposed. He steadied the wheel, veering onto a trail toward Carter Town, and only when the headlights suddenly vanished at a bend, the car retreating into the forest, did John exhale. The hunted feeling didn't fade. It fueled his drive to find answers in the old files no one dared reopen. The next morning, John returned to Carter County's administrative building. The basement archive, thick with dust, reeked of moldy paper and rust. He flipped on a yellow light, sifting through 1970s reports. Amid the chaos, he found a file of notes by Sergeant Daniel Harker, who led the Black Hollow search after the 1974 disappearance. The first page, in shaky handwriting, read, "Orders from above. Absolutely no entry to Black Hollow. Any officer who disobeys will pay with their life." John's spine chilled. In law enforcement, orders followed clear protocol, but this reeked of a threat from the shadows, not a superior. Flipping further, Harker's final entry, dated March 12, 1975, read, "I can't stay silent. Every night, I hear gunshots from Black Hollow. If I vanish, no an invisible hand is stopping us." The ink smeared, as if the pen was yanked away. John sat still, recalling tales of nighttime screams and green flames in the mine. Harker likely knew too much and became a target. Checking further, he confirmed Daniel Harker died in a car fire in April 1975, a month after his last note. Official cause, fuel leak. The investigation file was thin, lacking crime scene photos or witnesses. John clutched the note. If an officer was silenced to stop a Black Hollow probe, the force behind it was bigger than a mountain gang. It felt like a network capable of buying or killing anyone who dug too deep. That evening, John brought his findings to the office, planning to cross-reference them with evidence, the Colt .38 from the creek, the Deep Valley map, Clyde Sloan's notebook. He locked them in the evidence locker, a small room by the headquarters with a thick iron door, accessible to few. For safety, he noted the Colt's serial number on a separate paper, tucking it into his wallet. That night, John barely slept. He lay on his office couch, mind racing through fragmented clues, Roy Granger's new identity, the notebook's torn hollow #5 page, Harker's note, and the shadow tailing him. All pointed to Black Hollow and its secret. The next morning, a sight stopped him cold. The evidence locker door was ajar, its lock broken. Inside, metal cabinets were ransacked, evidence boxes upturned. John rushed to the drawer, holding the Colt .38, the key evidence tying to Roy Granger. It was gone. He stood frozen, a chill crawling up his spine. Someone wasn't just watching, they had the audacity and power to breach Carter County's police headquarters. The stolen Colt wasn't just a blow to the case, it was a blunt message. "We know what you're doing, and we're one step ahead." As he reeled, the office phone rang. He picked up, and a raspy voice said, "The Colt's back with its owner. Stop digging, Whitfield, if you want to breathe under the Appalachian sky." The line went dead. John stared out the window. The mountains stood silent, but inside, the darkness tightened its grip. John sat in his office, after the threatening call, the acrid smell of the broken evidence locker's lock lingering in his nose. The Colt 38. Living proof. Roy Granger didn't die in 1974, had been stolen under his nose. That night, he barely slept. Questions swirled. Who could brazenly break into Carter County's police headquarters? Who could act without a trace? Clearly, the shadow behind Black Hollow never vanished. The next morning, John received a brief anonymous message. Find Henry Miller, retired miner. He saw Roy. Below was the address of a rundown wooden house in Rockford, 40 miles from Carter. John hesitated, then hit the road. Henry Miller's house sat at the end of a dusty dirt road, surrounded by bare maple trees. The man, in his 70s, was gaunt, with pale blue eyes that seemed to see through things others wished to forget. When John introduced himself, Henry gave a dry laugh. Police. Huh? I thought you'd forgotten that case. Come in. I don't have long to keep secrets. In a room thick with cigarette smoke and whiskey, Henry poured John a glass, then one for himself. Leaning back, he stared at the ceiling, voice low. In 1980, I worked at a quarry near Rockford. There was a bar, Crow's Nest, where miners gathered. I saw him, Roy Granger. He went by Henry Collins. Papers, everyone called him that. But I couldn't mistake those eyes, that voice. I'd know him dead. John held his breath. Henry continued, deliberate. He sat alone at the bar's end, a bottle in front. Didn't talk much, but when drunk, he muttered. I heard him say, clear as day, I'm alive because of my brother's blood. The words stabbed John's mind. They confirmed not just the betrayal theory, but Roy's awareness of his guilt, surviving by killing his gang. You're sure? John asked, voice hoarse. Henry set his glass down, eyes blazing. Sure, I heard it more than once. Like a confession, but proud, sick. Everyone thought he was a drunk old man rambling, but I knew. John felt a fog lift from his mind. Roy didn't die in 1974. He lived as Henry Collins, haunted by Black Hollow's shadow. But a bigger mystery loomed, Hollow #5, the torn notebook page. If Roy held the key, where was it? Henry stood, fetching a dusty wooden box from an old iron cabinet. Placing it before John, he whispered, I meant to take this to my grave, but you needed more. John opened it. Inside was a set of rusted keys on an iron ring, at least 6, each with unique shapes and markings. One key made John's breath catch. It had 5 carved on its handle. He looked up, trembling. Where'd you find this? Henry tapped the table, voice rough. Deep Valley, 1982. I and some miners snuck back to the old mine for scrap. In a rock crevice half buried, I found this box. No one noticed. I took it. Didn't dare tell the police. With rumors of the missing men and fear of trouble, but I knew it wasn't meaningless. Kept it locked away for years, didn't touch it. Now, take it. John gripped the keys, feeling like he held the case's lifeline. If key number 5 opened Hollow #5, it was the hiding place of the greatest secret, the treasure, or the grave of the others. Henry poured another whiskey, eyes distant. Be careful, Inspector. People died digging into this. I knew Sergeant Harker. He said he'd expose it all, then burned in his car. That's what happens when you enter Black Hollow. John's jaw tightened, Harker's deadly note flashing in his mind. The truth had been locked away by blood and fire for decades, but now he held a literal key in his hand. As John left Henry's, the sunset blazed red. He tucked the keys in his coat pocket when a click sounded, a familiar shutter of a hidden camera. John spun, catching a glimpse of a dark-cloaked figure vanishing into the trees. Someone had watched the entire meeting, and they knew key number 5 had resurfaced. John gripped the wheel as he left Henry Miller's rundown wooden house. The rusted keys in his coat pocket thumped against his chest with each heartbeat, especially the one marked 5, a vivid symbol of the 1974 curse. He knew he couldn't delay. It was time to find Hollow #5, where all the pieces of the past weeks pointed. Old records and the Deep Valley Chest's map gave John a vague coordinate, an abandoned tunnel deep in the Black Hollow Mountains. Only former miners knew the way, and now he held the key. Early the next morning, John drove his pickup up a rocky mountain trail, the Appalachian peaks looming like a mournful shroud. John stopped at the narrow, tree-covered entrance. The wooden mine door was rotted, nearly swallowed by moss. He flicked on his flashlight, gripped his pistol, and slid the number 5 key into the rusted iron lock on the side door. A heavy click echoed, like the past being awakened. Inside was pitch black, a chill rushing from the earth. John stepped slowly, his flashlight sweeping over damp stone walls, revealing black mold streaks and tangled cobwebs. His breath steamed in the thick, rotting air. About 100 meters in, the beam hit a wider clearing, and John froze. Before him were 3 human skeletons, tangled on the stone floor. Rotted rope still clung to wrists and ankles, proof they were bound when they died. A shiver ran down John's spine. This wasn't a mine accident, it was an execution. He knelt, gloved hand lifting a tattered jacket from one body. In the breast pocket, John pulled out a small notebook, its leather cover hardened by mold. He opened it, scrawled words emerging on stained pages. Roy promised to split the gold. Then he fired. John gripped the notebook, chest heavy. This was a dying man's testimony, perhaps Mark Boone or another gang member, who trusted Roy Granger, only to be betrayed in the mountain's darkness. The confession matched everything he'd heard from Ethan Boone and Henry Miller. No doubt remained. Roy turned the 1974 robbery into a massacre to seize the treasure. But the tunnel's chill didn't end there. As John shone his flashlight deeper, he saw a stained rock wall. Stark against the gray stone was a dark, dried streak. Blood. Someone had used it to scrawl a trembling line. Crow lives. John stepped back, heart pounding. The words were a curse, or a dying man's final claim. The crow still lived. But who was the crow? A name absent from official records, only whispered in Mrs. Boone's memory, and now etched on this wall. The tunnel's darkness thickened, cold wrapping his throat. John suddenly felt he wasn't alone, that the shadow from Deep Valley, from Rockford, might be standing just outside, watching through the dark. He tucked the notebook into his jacket, turned, and left hollow hash 5, but the blood-scrawled words burned in his mind. Crow lives. As he exited, his flashlight swept right, catching a fresh boot print in the damp earth, sharply defined. Not his. Someone had been in the mine before, or was with him, just a thin rock wall away. John left hollow hash 5 as dusk fell. The mine's damp chill clung to him, as if the darkness still grasped his steps. In his hand was the moldy notebook with its desperate words. Roy promised to split the gold, then he fired. But most haunting was the blood on the wall. Crow lives. It stalked him, tying to every strange death he'd traced over weeks. The next day, John brought the notebook and details of the 3 skeletons to Carter County's forensics lab. Dr. Alvarez, a veteran coroner, took the bones and data from prior Black Hollow and Deep Valley excavations. For hours, John waited in the cold lab, hearing the hum of X-ray scanners and the clink of scalpels. Finally, Alvarez emerged, face pale. "John," he said, slamming a thick file on the table, "we're dealing with something far bigger than the 7 names in the 1974 records." John frowned. "What do you mean?" Alvarez opened the file, pointing to skull and spine images. "I analyzed age, injury marks, and fabric remnants. The remains from the abandoned mines around Black Hollow aren't just 7 people. There are at least 10 distinct individuals." John froze. 10? You're sure? "Absolutely," Alvarez replied. "Some bones match the 1974 robbery timeline. Others are older, around 1970, even 1968. All share one thing, signs of being bound and bullet holes in the back of the skull. This isn't a mine accident. It's execution." The words choked John. The gang's disappearance was just the tip of the iceberg. Someone had turned the abandoned mines into a secret graveyard, where betrayers eliminated not just their own but anyone connected, even outsiders. Alvarez flipped to more photos. blood-stained uniform scraps, a hand bone with a silver ring engraved J.H. At least 2 victims were never reported missing. No names in police records. They were erased, so no one would look. John tapped the table, trembling. A robbery had become a systematic killing spree. Someone orchestrated it, not just for treasure, but to bury all evidence. Every clue pointed to a hidden name, the Crow. Driving back, John's mind reeled. 10 bodies shattered the 7-robber legend, revealing that Appalachia had lived with a secret graveyard for decades, unaware. If more were killed and never recorded, the Crow had controlled official information, silencing authorities. That night, John sat alone in his office, the dim desk lamp casting yellow light on the tattered notebook and mind map. He lit a cigarette, smoke curling in hazy rings. Everything pointed to one scenario. The 1960s, 70s disappearances weren't legend, but a prolonged purge. Roy Granger might have pulled the trigger, but a bigger hand loomed behind him, calling itself, or called, the Crow. As the clock struck midnight, a knock sounded at the door. John started, hand on his gun. Outside was empty, only a white envelope on the mat. He picked it up, opening it. Inside was a brief, black-printed note. Don't look for the Crow. He's watching you. No signature, no trace. Just the smell of fresh ink and a chill seeping into his bones. John looked out the window. In the Appalachian night, the black forest swallowed the horizon. He felt someone out there blending into the dark, tracking his every move. John crumpled the note, but returning to his desk, he saw the hollow #5 notebook had shifted a few inches, as if a hand had touched it while he stepped away. John woke the next morning with the anonymous note still on his desk, weighing like a shadow on his chest. He hadn't slept. The chilling words, "Don't look for the Crow. He's watching you," burrowed into his mind. But John had no way back. Too much truth had surfaced to turn around. He decided to head north, to meet a former county clerk who'd signed off on Harker's 1975 death report. The Appalachian Pass was narrow, winding, fog thick enough to blind. John drove his old pickup, hands gripping the wheel. Each sharp turn beaded sweat on his brow. Suddenly, at the third curve he stomped the brake, and the pedal sank to the floor, lifeless. The truck roared downhill. John yanked the handbrake. Useless. The vehicle skidded on gravel, lurching like a wounded beast. He jerked the wheel, the truck veering toward the cliff's edge, stones clattering into the abyss. In a split second, John wrenched the wheel left, slamming into the hillside. Metal screamed, glass shattered. The truck spun, sliding a few meters before stopping, inches from the drop. John sat motionless, heart hammering. He gasped, realizing he'd narrowly escaped death. Clearly, the brakes were cut. This wasn't an accident, it was a warning. He stumbled out, breathing deeply. The stench of burnt rubber and engine smoke choked him. Calming down, he remembered to check the trunk. Opening it, he froze. Among scattered papers was a rusted Luger P08 pistol, its wooden grip cracked. Beside it, a small note in scrawled handwriting. "It's not over." John gripped the gun, dread spreading. Someone had broken into his truck, planting this weapon as a cold message. Why a Luger, a rare German pistol, seldom in American records, post 1940s. He rushed it to the office, entering its faint serial number into the old archive system. The result stunned him. The serial matched a gun reported missing from Carter County's evidence locker in 1976. The report noted, "Lost during inventory." No one was disciplined. The case quickly closed. John leaned back, hands trembling with the printout. Nearly a decade ago, someone in the police force helped cover up or abet Black Hollow's crimes. They might have killed Harker or cleared the way for key evidence to vanish. He recalled the broken evidence locker, the missing Colt .38, and now the rusted Luger in his trunk. A hand within the force, a shadow surviving decades, had the power and ruthlessness to erase traces. John clutched the Luger, the cold rust sticking to his glove. This wasn't just evidence, it was a challenge. Someone wanted him to know that even among his ranks, safety was gone. As he grappled in the office, the phone rang. He picked up, hearing only a long breath. Then a gruff male voice, "The Luger's back. And Whitfield, don't forget, we've got people in the same uniform as you." The line went dead, leaving John frozen amid four walls, feeling the crow's eyes in every dark corner. After last night's call, John knew the crow's shadow wasn't just in the Appalachian wilds, but woven into law enforcement itself. The rusted Luger from the 1976 evidence locker, placed in his trunk, was a declaration of war. His body ached from the brake failure on the pass, but his mind was taut as a wire. If the mastermind had an inside man, every record he held could be erased any time. He needed to trace Roy Granger's new identity, Henry Collins, to its roots. Bank records had led John to Henry, and now he followed that trail. He drove to Moonridge, a remote mountain village a day's journey from Carter. The road to Moonridge twisted through dense old forest, with only a few scattered wooden houses on the slopes. The villagers lived apart, rarely leaving, as if the modern world stopped at the red dirt road's edge. The village chief, a silver-bearded elder named Amos Wilkins, met John in the community house. When John mentioned Henry Collins, Amos's eyes darkened, then he nodded slowly. "Yes," Amos said, voice low. "Henry lived here, late 70s. Showed up out of nowhere, no past, no kin. But soon, he bought land, built a house, started a lumber yard. Folks said he struck gold, but I knew he got rich too fast, too strange. Then in 1990, he died. A stroke, they said. Simple funeral, no outsiders came." Odd. John scribbled intently. Amos met his gaze. More important is his son. After Henry died, the boy inherited all the forest land. Now he practically runs Moonridge. Anyone logging, hunting, or building in the woods goes through him. John looked up. "His name? Daniel Collins," Amos replied. "But some old folks swear he's not Henry's real son. Looks just like him, but Henry was old then. No one believed he had a kid that young. Whispers say Daniel's his heir from before Moonridge. Maybe a bastard. Who knows?" Here, family matters blend into the dark. A chill ran down John's spine. Daniel Collins, Moonridge's forest lord, could be Roy Granger's true heir, inheriting not just wealth, but the bloody secrets of Hollow Hash 5 and the Appalachian treasure. John pressed to verify. He asked Amos for any surviving photos of Henry. The old man rummaged in a wooden cabinet, pulling out a faded album. Pictures showed Moonridge residents at festivals, weddings, winter feasts. Near the end, John caught his breath. Henry Collins, Roy Granger, stood in a yard, arm around a young boy, holding a pistol. The photo's silver sheen chilled John. The gun in Henry's hand was a Luger P08, identical to the rusted one from his trunk, stolen from the evidence locker in 1976. The serial number matched, nailing the truth. Henry was tied to the stolen evidence, flaunting it as a trophy in Moonridge. John closed the album, hand tight. Roy Granger had lived nearly 2 decades, as Henry building wealth and raising an heir. Now, Daniel Collins, his successor, guarded the secret, wielding power over the forest. John left Moonridge's community house with the heavy album, mind heavier. The photo of Henry Collins, Roy Granger clutching the Luger matching the 1976 evidence, framed the truth. Roy didn't just survive, he boasted his spoils in his new community. But what haunted John was the shadow on the ridge, watching with a gleaming barrel. Clearly, Daniel Collins, Henry's son, knew someone was digging into his family's secrets. That afternoon, John got a lead from Amos Wilkins. The elder whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. "Henry's old cabin at the forest's edge still stands. No one's dared enter since he died in 1990. But if you want the truth, it's probably there." John drove to the abandoned cabin, nestled in dense maples. The wooden door was rotted, hinges creaking as he pushed hard. The air inside was thick with mold, dust, and a faint metallic tang like rust. He swept his flashlight, searching drawers. Most held only decayed clothes and old papers, but under a stack of boards, he opened a wooden chest, and his heart stopped. Inside, wrapped in dark canvas, was a thick leather-bound notebook, corners peeling, pages yellowed. It was Henry's diary. John carefully opened it. Scrawled entries spanned 1974 to 1980. The start detailed the robbery night, what papers called a strange disappearance. We had gold, money, liquor, but greed tore the gang apart. Morrison and I made a deal. We wouldn't let those fools share. Morrison gave me the abandoned mine to hide bodies. In return, he got a third of the haul. John's throat tightened. Morrison, a name surfacing for the first time. Who was he? He flipped further. Black Hollow was perfect. Morrison said he'd ensure no one in the county dared come near. He had people in the police, the government, he said. To keep gold, you trade blood. I did what was needed. One shot behind each head, simple. No one left to talk. John gripped the diary, heart pounding. This wasn't just proof of betrayal, but a clear confession. Roy Granger killed his gang for gold. But the bigger danger emerged. Morrison, the mastermind providing the mine to hide bodies and bribing officials. At the diary's end, the scrawl grew frantic, as if written in fear. Morrison won't let me leave. He says he's the Crow. He hides his face, but his shadow's everywhere. I'm just a puppet. If I turn on him, I'll lie in the mine with the others. I live, but every night I dream of him. Coal black eyes, his voice like a crow's call in the woods. John froze, blood icing in his veins. The Crow, the name haunting his journey, finally took shape. Morrison, the mining tycoon, who turned Appalachia into a secret graveyard. Roy was just a hired killer, a tool in his hands. He turned to the last written page, dated 1980, I want to run. Morrison won't allow it. He says if I go, my son will bear the curse instead. I'm scared. The Crow never dies. He was right. The next pages were blank. John closed the diary, breath ragged. This evidence didn't just expose the gang's betrayal, but revealed the whole cover-up network, from Morrison, the Crow, to bribe police, to Harker's accident death, to the 1976 stolen gun. All linked in a cold-blooded chain. He stuffed the diary into his evidence bag, but as he turned to the door, a faint creak came from the porch, like footsteps on wood. John doused his flashlight, still. Through a window crack, he saw a shadow flicker, then silence. Only the wind howled through the trees, but his instinct screamed. He'd been watched since entering the cabin. Back at the office, John reopened the diary to cross-check, but found the final pages torn out. The missing ones were marked 1982, when Roy suddenly grew rich in Moonridge. At the binding, smudged ink held two trembling words, Crow lives. John sat dazed at his desk, eyes fixed on the diary's yellowed pages. Roy Granger's shaky words had bared a truth he'd only dared suspect. Roy wasn't the only monster. He was the gun hand, but the true shadow, Morrison, orchestrated, hid, and consumed the community. The name echoed in John's mind like a haunting bell. Morrison, a wealthy businessman, hailed as a town benefactor who built schools, donated to hospitals, his photo hung in City Hall. To Appalachia, he was a model of generosity. But Roy's diary painted another portrait, the Crow, who weaponized darkness, turning blood into gold. John dug into Morrison's business records. In the county archives, he found thick files on 1960s, 70s land deals. One detail stunned him. Morrison owned 4 abandoned mines around Black Hollow and Deep Valley, all closed between 1972, 1975. The reason? No viable coal, economically unfeasible. But workers were never formally notified, just fired overnight. The gates locked forever. John traced his finger over an Appalachian map, marking the 4 mines. All lay within a 10-mile radius of Moonridge, where Morrison held the most forest land. Coincidence, or a network of secret graves? He recalled Dr. Alvarez's words, at least 10 bodies, some older than 1974. It fit. Morrison used the abandoned mines as mass graves, where anyone who betrayed or knew too much was eliminated. The 1974 night was just one link in a years-long killing spree. John continued digging. Morrison never directly appeared in gold or lumber deals, but his name surfaced in every local charity fund. His donations oddly coincided with times when the gang vanished or rumors of treasure changing hands emerged. To the community, he was a benefactor. To the missing, he was their executioner. One afternoon, John stood outside City Hall, staring at Morrison's large portrait in the main lobby. The painted eyes were icy, lips pressed into a half-smile. John shuddered. If this was the Crow's face he'd evaded justice for decades, worshipped at the town's heart. He noted everything, securing Roy's diary, the mine map, and Morrison's land records in a locked confidential file. But deep down, John knew he was entering more dangerous territory than ever. A man who turned 4 mines into graveyards could make an inspector like him disappear overnight. That evening, John returned to his small house on Carter's Edge. He checked his gun before unlocking the door. A new habit since the chase on the pass. The house was silent, the porch light dead. He stepped in, flipped the switch, the bulb flickered, then glowed. Everything seemed normal, until he reached the living room. John's heart sank. Newspapers and files he'd left were disturbed, but what froze him was the family photo on the wooden shelf. His ex-wife and daughter, now turned face down, the back exposed. An unmistakable sign, a warning. John rushed to check every door, every window. No signs of forced entry. Whoever broke in had a key, or slipped inside without damage. He returned to the flipped photo, hand clenched. The threat wasn't just to him, but to his daughter, the only person he still contacted after his broken marriage. The message was clear. One more step, and we'll come for your family. John sat in the dark house, eyes locked on the flipped photo and the scrawled threat on its frame. He knew the Crow wasn't just watching but striking at his weakest point, family. The next morning, with Roy's diary, the mine map, and Morrison's land records in hand, John decided to report directly to his superiors at Carter County headquarters. In the small meeting room, fluorescent light cast shadows on John's tired face. He laid out each piece of evidence, Morrison's 4 abandoned mines, the suspicious timing of their closures, the diary confessing Morrison lent the mine to hide bodies. He emphasized, this isn't just a robbery, it's a decades-long systematic killing spree. Morrison is the Crow. Silence gripped the room. Then Captain Rowe, the police chief, sighed, tapping the table. Whitfield, I'd advise you to stop here. John frowned. Stop? You just heard my evidence. Rowe cut him off, voice firm. You don't get it. Morrison's been tied to this region since before you joined. He's a benefactor the community owes deeply. Keep going, and not only your career, but your life won't last. John looked around. Some officers avoided his gaze. Others nodded subtly for silence. A chill spread in his chest. They knew. They'd known for years. After the meeting, as others left, a young officer, Jacob Turner, hurried to John in the hallway. Jacob's face was pale, voice trembling. Inspector, I have to tell you, my father was a cop here in the 70s. He told me about being called for a night mission. It was really moving bodies from Black Hollow to Deep Valley to dispose of them. He lived in fear his whole life. Before he died, he said, never mention Morrison. He controls everything. John gripped Jacob's shoulder. You sure? Jacob nodded, eyes red. My father never lied about this. Morrison didn't just bribe criminals, he controlled the county police since the 70s. Harker was killed for trying to talk. Missing files were altered right in this office. Why do you think the Colt .38 and Luger vanished? The evidence locker was never secure. The confession choked John. He realized he'd been fighting not just a shadow in the mountains, but a network rooted in the system he served. That afternoon, John drove back, mind reeling. He couldn't rely on his superiors. Even colleagues might be waiting to report his moves to Morrison. Isolation weighed on him, but it also steeled his resolve. If the Crow controlled the system, the only way was to bring the truth to light publicly. Entering his office, John found a brown envelope neatly placed on his desk. No one at headquarters reported a delivery. He opened it, spine-chilling. Inside was a black and white photo of himself, John Whitfield, standing outside his house last night, holding the family photo. The shot was from a distance, angled through trees, clearly taken by a hidden stalker. Scrawled in the corner, in handwriting matching the anonymous note, "You can't hide, Whitfield. The Crow's always behind your shoulder." John dropped the photo, rage and helplessness surging. Appalachia's darkness wasn't just lurking in the mountains, it had stepped into his home, capturing every moment, reminding him each breath was in the Crow's sights. Fire erupted at night. When alarms blared through Carter County headquarters, John raced to the evidence locker, where he'd stored months of work. Roy's yellow diary, the mine map, the rusted guns from the creek. Red flames roared through windows, black smoke billowing like a living nightmare. Wood crackled, metal popped in the Appalachian night. John shoved past two firefighters with hoses, diving inside. Smoke seared his throat, breath wheezing. But he couldn't let the evidence turn to ash. By instinct, he reached the iron cabinet where he'd stored the key items. The lock was melted, hinges warped. Shielding his face with his elbow, he yanked the door open. In the flickering firelight, he glimpsed the dark leather diary and a rusted pistol still on the bottom shelf. Perhaps the arsonist hadn't expected him to return in time. He grabbed both, stuffed them into his coat, and bolted out just as the roof collapsed with a thunderous crash. Stumbling onto the grass, body coated in soot, John heard sirens wail, the crowd buzzing. But amid the chaos, one thought consumed him. Someone had decided to erase the truth. The evidence locker wasn't just burned, it was executed. He sat in the dark, watching smoldering ashes. The diary in his hand was now the only thing keeping the truth alive. But he knew, one way or another, Morrison, or rather the Crow, had sent a message. He'd never let evidence against him survive. The next morning, John returned to the office. People whispered the fire was an electrical accident. He gave a bitter smile. What accident flares up right after he reported Morrison? The answer was obvious. Alone, John wiped ash from the diary, its scrawled words reviving in the smoke. "Morrison is the Crow, I'm just a puppet. He'll never let me leave." While noting details, John noticed a white envelope neatly placed among his papers. He didn't recall anyone leaving it. His hand trembled as he opened it, finding a single sheet with bold text. "Come to Deep Valley tonight, if you want the truth." John sat still, heart pounding like it would burst. This wasn't like prior threats. It was an invitation, or a trap. Deep Valley, where he'd found the wooden chest with the map and blood for gold. Roy lives. Now someone wanted him back there, at night, when Appalachia's darkness was thickest. He looked out the window, seeing heavy fog blanket the mountains. In the dark, he thought he saw a green flame flicker. The light villagers said, "Marked wronged souls." Gripping the diary, John knew tonight would change everything. He'd either find the final truth, or Deep Valley would be his grave. John had no choice. If he didn't go to Deep Valley tonight, he'd be swallowed forever by Appalachia's web of lies. He tucked his pistol into his belt, stuffed the diary into his coat, and drove straight to the old mine. The mountain road was pitch black, fog thick enough to choke the tires. In the rearview mirror, he glimpsed flickering lights, unclear if a car or just his strained eyes' illusion. At Deep Valley's entrance, the valley echoed with howling wind. The old mine's mouth gaped like a beast's, darkness absolute. John flicked on his flashlight, stepping inside. The damp earth and rusted metal smell pressed his chest. Suddenly, a metallic clang sounded behind, and gunfire tore through the air. John dove aside, rolling to the floor, gun drawn. His flashlight beam flashed, catching three figures blocking the exit, shotguns in hand. A man's voice growled, "You shouldn't have come back." It was Daniel Collins, Henry's son, Roy Granger's true heir. His eyes blazed in the dark, face hard as stone. My old man traded blood for gold. Now it's my turn to keep it. You'll get nothing. Before John could reply, he fired. The shot echoed in the tunnel, sparks flashing. Bullets struck the stone wall, spraying dust. One of Daniel's men fell, groaning. John dove behind a wooden mine support. The gunfight raged, each shot thundering underground. Finally, John dropped another man, leaving only Daniel and one other alive. In the chaos, John closed in, kicking the gun from the other man's hand, pinning him to the stone floor. The flashlight lit the man's panicked face, young pale blue eyes. John pressed the gun to his temple. "Talk, what's the truth?" The man trembled, spitting words. "Morrison, it's him. He and Roy made a deal. Blood for gold. Roy was the shooter. Morrison covered it up. Every death in the mines was to hide the treasure. Then Morrison bribed cops, judges, everyone." John pressed harder. "Morrison's dead. He died in the 80s. "Hugh lying?" The man gave a dry laugh, spitting blood onto the stone. "No, Morrison's alive. He never died. Changed his name, moved out of county, but still pulls strings. Daniel told us. Plenty of officials, cops, still take his money. He's the crow, and he's watching you." The words hit John like a hammer. If Morrison was alive, the network he faced wasn't just past, it was now. A man powerful enough to bribe authorities, ruthless enough to turn mountains into graves. Then Daniel Collins shouted, charging with a shot. The bullet grazed John's ear, sparking off the wall. John rolled, firing back. Daniel crumpled, gun clattering, blood soaking his shoulder. He gritted his teeth, trying to rise, but John was on him, gun to his forehead. "Your father betrayed everyone. Now you're doing the same," John growled. Daniel smirked, laughing coldly. "You think killing me stops it? The crow lives. He runs Appalachia. You're just a fly in his web, Whitfield." John bound Daniel's hands with old mine rope, dragging him out. His breath was heavy, but his resolve was iron. He had to find Morrison the mastermind. The diary had revealed much, but the survivor's confession was the final blade piercing decades of cover-up. Carter County's courtroom was packed on that early winter morning in 1991. Snow fell lightly outside, but inside, the crowd's heat made the air stifling. John Whitfield sat in the witness stand, facing the man he'd chased for nearly a decade, Jack Morrison. White-haired in a crisp suit, his face calm like a successful businessman. But his deep black eyes made John shudder. Eyes matching every rumor, cold, fearless. The prosecutor opened a thick file, laying out evidence: Henry Collins' diary, the number 5 keychain, the Colt, 38 from the creek, the blood-stained notebook from Hollow Hash 5. Witnesses took the stand. Mark Boone's elderly mother, trembling, recounted his last letter. The retired miner swore he'd seen Roy Granger as Henry. The coroner told the jury at least 10 skeletons in the mines all died, the same hands bound, shot in the skull. Each testimony peeled back Appalachia's fog. The prosecutor concluded, "You heard the gang vanished in the woods. The truth is, they were systematically killed. Morrison turned abandoned mines into secret graveyards, trading blood for gold, hiding it all with ghost stories." In the audience, sobs broke out. Families once thought to have deserters were vindicated. Their husbands, brothers, sons didn't flee. They were betrayed and eliminated. John saw the eyes of mothers, grown children, pain mixed with relief, as the truth was named. Morrison stood. His lawyer argued, "No evidence proves my client pulled a trigger." But the prosecutor countered, "You didn't need to when you turned mountains into slaughterhouses. You controlled county police, ordered disposals, took gold from your gang's blood. That's premeditated murder," the jury whispered. Then the judge's gavel demanded silence. All eyes turned to Morrison. He stood tall, voice low and raspy. "You want the truth? Fine. They didn't vanish because of deep woods. They vanished because of me. One by one," and he paused, glancing at John. "There are more bodies you haven't found." The courtroom erupted. A woman wailed, A man leapt up cursing. John's blood froze. Morrison had confessed, not for mercy, but as a challenge, asserting he still held secrets, that Appalachia hid more graves. The judge restored order. Morrison sat, face unmoved, but John knew his confession hid a darker truth. The victim count was likely higher. The trial stretched into late afternoon. Morrison was charged with premeditated murder, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and money laundering. The jury agreed, life without parole. The gavel struck, the room exploding, sighs, choked sobs, scattered applause from townsfolk. John stepped out, snow falling thicker, blanketing the steps. He looked at the gray sky, still unsoothed. Morrison was convicted, but his final words haunted. More bodies. Appalachia held secrets, yet unopened. John knew this fight wasn't truly over. In March 1992, spring's chill lingered as wind swept the valley. At Black Hollow's entrance, a new stone marker rose, engraved with names of those vanished without trace in the 1970s. Victims' families gathered, placing wildflowers from the mountains, whispering prayer. Local papers ran bold headlines: Appalachian crime legend solved. Truth of the vanished outlaws. TV showed John Whitfield, weary but resolute, among villagers, the man who lifted the veil on a generation's secret. He saw tear-streaked elderly faces, children now grown, learning their fathers weren't deserters or traitors. Justice came late, but it came. In the county police log, the case closed with dozens of life sentences for Morrison and his cohorts. But for John, gaps remained. A week after the trial, John sorted files and relics from Henry Collins' home. Flipping the tattered notebook's final pages, he found a small envelope hidden in the hardcover. Inside was an old map, unmatched to excavated sites. It bore a red cross and shaky text, Hollow #13, where the crow buried the last. John sat still, heart racing. Was Morrison truthful? Were more bones, more cries of injustice, still buried in the mountains? The map trembled in his hands, a reminder the hunt wasn't over. The next day, reporters interviewed him in Mill Hollow. One asked, "Do you believe secrets remain unsolved?" John gave a faint smile. In these mountains, truth never sleeps. The quote headlined the front page, chilling and inspiring Appalachia. He returned to Black Hollow as the sun set behind the peaks. Thick fog wove through rocks, wind howling like echoes of the past. John touched the memorial stone, whispering, "You're no longer forgotten." He couldn't restore lost years, but history was now rewritten rightly. Leaving the mine, John paused on a high ridge, gazing at the Appalachians stretching into the mist. Every forest, stream, and abandoned mine now bore the hue of untold stories. He understood. Greed, betrayal, and bloodshed birthed the ghosts haunting these mountains. But truth, though buried, would always rise. In his final diary entry, John wrote, "Justice comes late, but it can't be hidden forever. What's buried in stone, water, and time will eventually surface." The crow was just a symbol of bottomless greed and betrayal among brothers. But Appalachia will also remember those who fell, reminding us truth never dies. The legacy wasn't just the memorial or court files, but a warning for the mountains. Every ghost story might hide real bodies. Tales thought legendary often veil crimes. For John, though aging, he clung to the Hollow #13 map, a weight on his chest, both burden and promise. In Appalachia, legends never end. The story of the vanished outlaws will echo through generations, a scar, a reminder that blood and gold never mix without casting shadows. The tale of the 1970s Appalachian outlaws isn't just a buried historical tragedy, but a mirror to today's America. Through his investigation, Inspector John Whitfield uncovered a horrific truth. Those thought to have fled were killed by their own, buried in abandoned mines for treasure. The truth was hidden by Morrison, a town benefactor, and the Crow, the shadow master controlling police, officials, and public opinion. This echoes modern America, where communities still face corruption, crimes veiled by the sheen of power and wealth. The bound skeletons in mines. The rusted Colt .38 from the creek, the blood-scrawled crow lives, aren't just case details, but warnings that truth, though buried, will rise. Like many wrongful convictions, political scandals, or financial crimes, eventually exposed in the U.S. The lesson: justice may come late, but never vanishes, if people persist in seeking it. In a vast nation like America, where community trust is often tested by misinformation or interest groups' manipulation, the Appalachian story reminds us new hollow #13 cess must not emerge. Every citizen, every community, must stay vigilant, speak out, and challenge power. Like John, we must believe that truth, pursued to the end, will light up the darkest corners. Thank you for joining us in uncovering a truth buried for decades in the Appalachian Mountains. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on revealing more secrets in our next video.